All right. Well, thank you, Beverly, for agreeing to chat with me today. And we're very excited about you joining our conference in Santa Fe, where you are right now, in May of 2022. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the theme of our conference with you and get your takes on it. And the theme is engagement, and it's engagement from a variety of different perspectives as it relates to spiritual direction and spiritual companionship. So I wanted to start with, talking a little bit about what that term means to you, engagement, right? I mean, and I'll just do the following preamble. People usually think of engagement as something very active, very energetic, like demonstrating on the streets, or taking some kind of action that is very demonstrative and very visible. And I think there's other types of engagement as well. So how do you look at engagement, and what are some of the ways that you engage with the world, particularly as seen through the lens of spiritual direction and spiritual companionship?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to be here with you, SeiFu. I very much associate with what you're saying, because for me, engagement, particularly in the spiritual direction context, I see it primarily as an engagement of interiority, of what I've called at different points a kind of a play on words, but sort of a mystical activism, in the sense that I think one of the big gaps we have in our culture today, both externally and internally, is the ability and willingness and the education to engage with the deeper mystical life. And we tend to lack resources in really even approaching the kind of depth and breadth of what goes on inside a person's psyche and soul, if you so to speak. And so when I think of it, and of course, not engagement as opposed to or different from external activity, because contemplation always overflows into some kind of action in the world, giving in the world, love in the world. But my focus has primarily been in my life and in my practice with that deeper interiority. And so when I think of engagement, I think, first of all, there's just some words that come from. One of them is depth. Like, how do we encourage depth in ourselves and in each other? In other words, to no longer be afraid of that depth, of the actual mystery of life, of the awe-inspiring dimensions of consciousness. And many people are kind of afraid of that depth, because in a way they've been taught, or they've experienced oppression, violation, harm to that pristine, unborn part of us. So I think in part of the trajectory of spiritual direction for me is to encourage and affirm not only the intensity and beauty of the depth, but the right we have, the spiritual right we have to live in that realm. Because so much of the world, and I'm sure you know this yourself, is always pulling us out of that interiority. And of course, again, just to reiterate, it's not interiority over against anything, as opposed to, the life of the world or the beauty of nature or, the work we do. It's an interiority that affirms everything, that fulfills the value of life on all of its dimensions. Excuse me. And I also think that, again, not to travel down this road too far, but I tend to go pretty far down this road. So is the whole issue of suffering. Okay, what is it? How do we engage with suffering? The suffering of our own beings, the suffering of the world. What do we do? How do we identify with or give hope to a world that is struggling? And there's so many different, of course, different parts of that. And secular activism or activism in the world is very important in helping to ameliorate suffering. But there's also the suffering in the soul, and the ways in which the soul is wounded in different capacities. And how can the spiritual direction relationship engage with that suffering and have it be of benefit, to others and to all beings? I was reading recently about Catherine of Siena, who was talking about suffering, and I don't have the exact phrase with me right now, but she uses this idea that the degree of our passion to ameliorate suffering, our passion, our desire to see it ameliorated, creates, a light in the soul. And even to the degree that we are unable to affect change on the physical level, or apparently on the physical level, that passion to embrace suffering, to bear it, does lead to changes in the world of, mystery, in the world of, the interior depth of others. And so sometimes there's a misunderstanding that, can we heal all suffering? Well, the world shows us we're not able to do that, right? The world has much suffering, but we are able to participate and bear the suffering of others when we put our whole passionate selves on our longing to see the world be different. And I think that that's a very hopeful thing, because there's so many times and so many ways in which we are feeling the oppression of the world. We're feeling the oppression of others in our inner lives, and feeling the pain of the earth and, of the divine, of the holy. And we ask ourselves, what can we do? What have I done? But some of the I don't even know if remedy is the right word, but some of the path that leads us towards healing and wholeness is recognizing that our passion to alleviate suffering is itself part of the path, to whatever degree we are able to do that, and to honor that place in us that wishes to see the world be different. And so in spiritual direction, so many of us go through deep soul wounds, and the language of the wounding of the soul, the language of the ways in which, as an anonymous text, medieval text that says the friends of God suffer, right? The ways in which the friends of God suffer is something very important, I feel, for this time in history and for this whole issue of engagement. Because it's by looking into this interiority that we get a pathway toward healing divisions. And it comes from deep within. It's not being superimposed. It's coming from the depth of that mystery, a path, a way of transformation, a light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. And it's so rich. It's so profound. It's like, I think of if we use the image of a tree with these roots going out everywhere, just spreading out all over the soil that we can't see. They're invisible because they're beneath the soil. That's how I think of this engagement. When we're willing to go into that depth, it's this trajectory of, underground spirit and transformation is kind of spreading around. And that kind of engagement, it brings solace to the spirit. We know we are contributing to the good. And we're willing to bear the difference. We're willing to bear the struggle in order to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly. There's so much there in what you've said, and so many things I would love to unpack with you for the next 2 hours, but we're not going to do that. But I am struck by, and I've read your books, some of them, and you're always talking about the monk within and interiority and a connection to the contemplative kind of wellspring that, as you just said, informs all of our actions in the world. And so I wonder, in the context of so many spiritual directors who are deep introverts, right? They're interior, but they're also very introverted about it, and wonder how they can manifest that connection to the wellspring that informs their desire to support others in their own search for God, if you will. So maybe there's that shyness or introversion, and they're constantly asking, how can I engage meaningfully in the world? And you spoke beautifully about that a moment ago. But what kind of, maybe it's another definition of action, right? That isn't, stepping on the accelerator very visibly, screaming down the highway. How do you engage as an introverted mystic, introverted interior monk, if you will?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, because the whole practice of spiritual direction is an engagement. I mean, I know it doesn't matter whether you're introverted or extroverted. It's speaking soul to soul. It's speaking heart to heart. It's passing on an ancient tradition that has been operating from time immemorial. I mean, clearly, humans have always, dialogued with each other about ultimate things. And so, to me, the gift of being able to speak soul to soul to another person, however quietly, however boisterously, whatever, is a form of profound action. And so from that, I think, comes a sense of taking, even though I talked about suffering and depth earlier, all of that is in service of love and joy and sharing the gift, right? So I guess I'm not really clear, or I don't really understand the issue with how to take that. There's a discrepancy between the interiority of, let's say, the monk and being effective. Because what could be more effective in a way than really listening to spirit, to God, speaking through another person, right? As they seek to engage with you in the things that have the most meaning to them. So, and of course, from all of these things come other attributes, such as teaching, such as study. For in my life, for example, spiritual direction, healing, teaching, study, they've all been part of one thing. They've all been, part of the whole circle. And I think many of us do that. We pray, we meditate, we teach, we engage in spiritual companionship. And it's all part of a great tradition of the human search for meaning. You know, the building up the blocks of the holy in this world. And this happens every day, you know, in our families, in you know, what we do when we go out on the streets, how we speak to people, carrying that message of love and joy and peace to others. I mean, to me, that's all part of the whole activism. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, but that's.
No, I think you've understood it perfectly. And I think your response is beautiful. And what could be more engaging than a soul-to-soul connection is what I hear you answer.
Yeah.
And I can't disagree with that. I think there's, you know, sometimes people equate engagement, particularly in these times where there's so much discord, right? And there's all of these tensions that are manifesting very visibly on the streets, and with healthcare mandates and tribal allegiances, and all of this is welling up in a very, very visible and usually, unfortunately, and sometimes very violent way. And so, you know, it's a wonderful reminder that you've just given us that contemplative engagement is actually the best way to respond to that. And so, thank you for that. You know, and please go ahead.
It's almost, you know, it's almost like this is the challenge in our times, to be centered in an uncentered world, right?
Yeah.
To be steady in a world that is unsteady, and to, you know, to be like, you know, sort of how monasteries have, what monasteries have provided in diverse cultures over the centuries is a point of stability when, you know, everything around that location is falling apart. So how do we become a point of stability? Whether we want to call it the monk within or whatever, it doesn't matter the term. How do we become a point of stability, a point of home for the homeless, a point of centering for what's uncentered in our own beings? And it's a challenge. It's not easy, right? But it feels to me like, you know, there's a place where we're being like condensed, you know. It's like we're being condensed on a point, and the point is hold tight to the divine, hold tight to the spirit in the midst of this tumultuousness. And I think that that's, you know, that people, because of the pain we feel about the world, we naturally want to find a solution. We naturally, you know, want to create change. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's all very important. And each of us have a different role or location in that. So it's not to say that someone that is affecting change in a more external way is any less effective than someone praying. But it's also true that someone praying is not ineffective.
So Beverly, we're really looking forward to seeing you in Santa Fe next year, and wondered if you had anything you wanted to add for the SDI community.
Well, I just wanted to welcome everybody to the SDI conference in May of 22, and I really look forward to seeing you, whether in person or via, you know, Zoom or digital format. I'll be giving a talk and also offering a workshop and institute, and I look forward to engaging with each of you in our mutual love for the Spirit.